que me preguntabais, bueno, si iba a hacer alguna presentación especial del tema. Yo he preferido dejar el protagonismo precisamente para vosotros, es decir, forzaros a que participéis, así que por favor, vamos, o sea, nos tenéis que forrar a preguntas. Simplemente, Daniela, do you prefer English? For me it's okay, for you it's...
We can move to English, just to...
Okay. Then I have just scheduled 3 questions, just to, so to say, put in frame all the things we have been doing here. So the first question is, you have seen, for instance, in this morning, Fidel was also presenting the typical scheme of this ODS, no, SDO, ODS in Spanish. This, okay, you have clean water, you have food, you have education, gender equality, you have a lot of things, and no materials. There's no materials in all these icons that you normally see. So my first question is, when you hear more or less together the words or the terms circular economy and materials, what does come to your mind? What do you think? Because we are always talking about sustainability or circular economy, and normally materials do not appear explicitly. So what is coming to your mind when you see these 2 words together? Daniela?
I'm sorry. Okay, in my view, even if materials do not appear, in my view materials are in some way hidden inside some of those topics. For example, water, energy. Water availability is also linked probably with materials, because materials can be an active part in future in order to obtain pure water or desalinization, or to obtain condensate and obtain water. So this can be an active part. Also, when you think to our life and to the availability of energy, of course, materials take a relevant part, as we have discussed this morning about photovoltaics. When we think to circular economy, of course, also materials take a relevant role, because we have to think that, as we have already said several times, we cannot use so much natural resources, and we should think to recycling, for example, the photovoltaic panels we already have, and take care about recycling and also engineering in a certain way the products of tomorrow, in order to be able to recycle those products without the use of so many chemicals and so much energy. So this is more or less my idea.
And for your view, Fidel, do you come from a different field? I mean, we come from materials, and of course our view is that materials are overall, that's clear. Right. But from a person who is not so close to materials, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I have to get away from geophysics and the materials of the earth and how this relates to climate. This is a very different context. For me, as a relative outsider, circular economy relates to sustainability and some of the challenges that we need to face in the future regarding keeping with sustainable development goals and with climate change and objectives or targets. And if you tell me materials, I have a very primitive reaction, which is thinking about the state of evolution of humankind. So I guess that's something that you all have thought at some point. I can help thinking about iron, copper, about the evolution in which we were able to process materials in a way that reflected the state of evolution until we arrived at carbon, petroleum, oil, which is what we are having in the discussion to some extent today. And if we now think about materials for the future, I think that we try to bring the concept of efficiency, trying to get more efficient solutions for the in a technological evolution for the energy problem. That's, in my ignorance, what comes to my mind. Because in the evolution of the population, the numbers that we are having and the numbers we will have, we cannot rest at expecting, sorry for this, a proportional response in terms of energy demand to that of the population. We have to reduce the energy demand in a way that this is the result of having more efficient technologies, more efficient materials. That's the only, I don't know if solution, but the only approach I can imagine. Does this help?
And do you have some ideas and examples that come to you? To you or you? I mean, some of them I have told about them in class, so you have heard about them. At least some of you.
Already some.
About these materials, so don't be shy.
What are I don't actually know what are you asking.
Now I am asking the same question. What do you think when you see together these two words, that, or these two terms, that normally are not so explicitly correlated, at least? Is there any example that comes to you suddenly that put everything in context?
I actually think the first time I heard this when this developing materials was in material physics in the classroom. Yeah, but it was kind of this we use some devices that we are calling obsolete to create cobalt, that raw material, and how to subtract from air or from mineral or from things, and use it again. And that's the first thing that comes to my head when I think about quick argument, which might not be the right answer, but it is actually that. So, anyone else want to talk?
I mean, myself, I can think into particular examples which are quite somehow far away together, one from the other. But I think that can be quite easily related to these 2030 goals. One is the phase change materials, and the other problem is the self-healing materials. And, I mean, they can contribute to different goals. In the case of phase change materials, it's quite clear that you can contribute, you can use these materials to fight against the climate change in cities. It's a way to create smart buildings or more comfortable buildings without spending a lot of energy in air conditioning. And in the case of the self-healing materials, for me, probably one of the most clear examples is when you think in a refugee camp, and you can think that any small heart, just in children that are playing, and just something, it's quite easy that they have a scratch in the skin or something like that. And this can be a real problem, a very complicated problem, because there are no sanitary conditions. And so in this sense, this kind of materials, I think, can help quite a lot. I mean, some of you probably still remember the example I gave you to some of you in class. In Vikings' time, there were a Viking chief that was defeated, and the use was to cut the head of the enemies. And he took the head of the enemy and hung it in the horse, the horse ties or whatever, and with a tooth, he suffered a scratch in the skin, and he died. Just because sepsis problem. And this is the kind of things that it was a simple scratch, not a big heart. It was not a heart in the battle, just a scratch in the skin. So this is quite normal, for instance, in refugee camps or something like that. And then I think these kind of materials could be really quite helpful. And these are materials that are being investigated right now. So it's probably one of the uses I think is less evident when you think on sustainability, but I think it's quite related to one of the main goals of the agenda. So, and the phase change materials, of course, surely you can tell much more than me, because they are used to create this green island in the cities to avoid heating, and that you can move your comfortability zone to 5-10 degrees lower, which is also quite important. So, some more example or something you can contribute? Okay, then we have the next question. We have been talking about, and now it's quite frequent to talk about circular economy, of course. Really, do we know what circular economy is? What's circular economy? What does it mean?
Okay, I can start. In my view, in some fields we are still a little bit far from a real circular economy concept. Some ideas are now starting, and for example, for what's concerned, the example that are much close to my field, which is related to photovoltaics, there are now some, there has been a big European project that is named PU Cycle, which is related to the possibility to build solar cells with old panels, so with silicon which is kept from the old panel. However, it's not easy to think about this now. It's important to think about circular economy when you project a new device, when you project new materials, because you should take care about the fact that at the end of life this product must be recycled. So the different parts that are of the device should be detached, should be recycled in a sustainable way. I think this is still a step that must come. Of course, for silicon technology it's not so difficult because silicon melt at 1,400 degrees, and the metals which are on the top of the silicon melt at lower temperature. So you can also recycle and detach the different parts by melting at different temperatures. But there are probably more sustainable ways to do this.
Yeah, that's an important point. What you have said is that, and it's something we see every day. When you design a product, you must design it with a completely different scheme, because now we are quite used to a culture which is I use, I waste, I use, I waste. So most of the devices you use cannot be dismantled. It's so simple, because are ensembled in such a way that when you try to dismantle them, they're broken. And one of the first steps is just to get this new culture, or this old culture, because in former times it was not so. I mean, when I was a child, most of the devices could be dismantled and remounted and dismantled again, and so many times. But with the time, since things have become much cheaper, we have closed this idea that we must reuse or we must change it. So one of the most important points is the design of the product. And of course there are also materials play an important role. And for you, Fidel?
Again, I can only come from a quite naive approach. Some of my colleagues are devoted to research in wind energy. And then the conversation again goes to how can you design and reuse in a way, or then make it disappear in a gentle way, the materials that are taking part or used in a wind mast, for instance. That's a kind of conversation I have heard. So it's not even something that I have read in papers or that makes part of my usual life. In the context of meteorology or climate, or the research that we do, I must say this is not a conversation or something that is on the air. Maybe I should do the self-critics there and there would be some ideas. But it's not usually something that we think about, except for these specific examples related to technology, which is again a bit what you are saying, right? Maybe the computers, because we use a lot of computing, HPC, high performance computing, and then you say, what do you do with all those computers? Or ourselves, like I remember a couple of years ago, I bought already an old computer in Wallapop, in one of these second-hand, and thinking in a naive way that we could reuse it for our purpose, because what we wanted to do was not such demanding. But then there was a problem with the equipment itself. We could repair several problems that sequentially appeared, but then we faced something, and the equipment is in the garage of a colleague of mine, and we were not able to. And I guess this relates to the design, the components, the outdated of the parts, or our lack of knowledge of knowing. But this is only a small take. This is no real vision.
I think it's also a problem of cost, because something similar. Last year, the heater at home was broken. I mean, we knew that it was because of a storm. So because of a storm, a component of one of the circuits was burned. And we could even identify which component, but there was no way to replace it. So we had to go for the full plate, the full circuit, and it was something like 200 euros. The problem is that for the people repairing it, it's not worthy to go with the solder and take the transistor and change it. It's much easier. But also, that's much closer to you, I think. When we think in circular economy, it's quite almost every day. I don't know in Italy, but here now, I guess it's more or less the same. It's somehow fashion for most of the commercial trademark to say that. Yesterday, for instance, I saw an advertisement from Bimbo. Bimbo is bread for sandwiches. It's one of the biggest here. And so they say, all plastic in all our bags is completely recyclable, and it's recycled, and it's blah blah blah. Everything is everything is green. It's completely green. However, in many cases, of course, I don't know if it's the case of these packages by Bimbo, but in many cases, the problem is that the waste of energy, the waste of water you use to recycle that product is much worse. So we come to something which is much closer to which is what happened with the carbon footprint in all these recycling processes. That somehow I have the feeling that in many cases the circular economy it's being used in a quite tricky way, because they say they are selling that everything is so green, so it's green, it's perfect, but at the end of the day they are they're wasting a lot of energy and water and what do you think about this part of this? That's much closer to you in the sense that it affects much more to the carbon footprint, how are the recycling processes?
Well, this I don't have much experience with the processes of how to recycle. The way that we treat the emissions is by their use in climate models, but from my experience in research. But it's clear from the knowledge that comes from it that there is space for much improvement in knowing actually what is the impact of this footprint. So in all these processes, if we ask ourselves how much is the carbon, how much is the equivalent emissions from this action, most of the times we don't know. And that's at my basic level what I would think, even from a university educational level, that would be educational to the people. Just the knowledge in terms of the price in carbon or the costs in carbon emissions that our activities have. So maybe I'm answering in a different direction because I'm not familiar so much to calculating the costs or the impacts of these actions and these materials. But this is something that what is viable, what we can do in the environment of a faculty or a university, is even without going to what in industry means to produce these materials, what is the cost of our activities, and then extend this to the industry. Well, in many cases of the industry, they are already obliged to calculate carbon emissions in very different aspects. So what I can say is that this should be done more, and in my opinion, I think it has an effect on the vision of people in the culture, in the way that we address things like what we were discussing during lunch, like recycling or reusing. Because otherwise, I think there is a certain cultural aspect to this. These issues you are describing are more considered only when people give value to them. And you can give value to that either from the perspective of feelings / moral standpoints, or because they have economic value. So many of the things related to a green planet, Green Deal, green economy, they have value because they can nowadays show profit. Can circular economy be profitable at some point? Is this something that we have to instigate or promote from the point of view that it is environmentally friendly? Or is it something that you can make profit from and therefore connect very much with the values of the current ways of economy? I don't know if the question is valid, but this is a small talk, right?
No, I think it's pretty quite interesting. Because,
so if you don't push, in my impression, if I don't know whether if you don't, they would have a chance if you don't push them from the point of view of being profitable, and I'm sorry, because some people could be hurt by hearing this. But it is clear that when things become profitable, then they tend to be successful.
no, I think it's a quite interesting point of view. And also from the point of view of changing the culture, because, for instance, in the example I told you before, it's clear, I'm not sure whether from the environmental point of view, really the plastics are green or not. Probably they are wasting more energy or more water than needed. But even in that case, what I think is quite positive is that they are giving the message that we must take care of that. And probably they are not right in the sense, or probably they are, I don't know. But even if they are not right in the sense that they are not using the most efficient recycling processes, they are transmitting a message which is quite positive. Which is, and that 2 years ago it was not so expanded, so to say. It's okay, take care. You can eat the sandwich, but the plastic bag is green, so it's important. There is some value, which is more in the ethical point of view.
Or if you go to the supermarket, they will charge you for it, which wouldn't happen 10 years ago. Yeah. So it's not good business if you have to pay for it and you may take your costume type of bag or whatever, even if it's small money. But
yeah, that is a message. I think it's a message. How is for example?
Yes. you have to pay if you take the bag from the supermarket. If you take your bag with yourself, you have to pay.
Now, in fact, it's quite curious because when I was a child, if you want to buy, for instance, some beer, refreshments, whatever, you went to the shop and you had to bring your bottles. And you brought your bottles, empty bottles, or you had to pay for it. And so it changes quite rapidly that there was no necessity to bring the bottles again to the shop. And now it changed again rapidly when we are recycling, so it's somehow it's, how do you see when you are in a different, completely different age that we are? So the evolution you have seen is completely different. I mean, I can compare, for instance, that something which was probably more sustainable when I was a child. Then I have lived the boom of all the plastic and no return bottles and all this stuff, and now I come back to my childhood somehow. How is for you? Because your perspective is completely different because you have not this evolution. How do you see it? No, not you, Beatriz.
Okay, I think that when we born in the, I mean, when I 5 years old, in the school, we recycle, we learn all of that. So I think that we are more conscious of what is happening. And also, well, I mean, I'm not old people, but sometimes was Fidel said that maybe the recycling process is more contaminating. So sometimes I have the question that if it's better, for example, the paper bags are more contaminating the processing than the plastic bag. So sometimes you take a paper bag because if they go to the sea, don't contaminate the sea, but the production of this bag is better taking a plastic one. I mean, I don't know if
Yes, yes, yes.
you have to
You have to balance.
yeah.
You have to
What is
balance.
better, the contamination, the CO2 contamination, or the sea's contamination?
But the problem there is that sometimes there is something like a black hole there. You know that you are recycling your glass bottle, but you don't know what happens afterwards. You trust that the next step will be something eco-friendly or low energy or whatever, but in fact you don't know. And maybe we need also some information from that side, because we can make research, we can improve the steps after you place your bottle in the cup. Yeah. And this is something that we don't know. So it's very easy to fail. And if someone tells you that, okay, the next step is more contaminating, high energy consumption, you leave it. And maybe it's not true. Maybe that's not real. Maybe you place your bottle in one place, and the next step are really eco-friendly, are really low energy consumption, but we don't know, we believe what people say, and maybe we need more information in that, in what happened afterwards. And also I would like to give another idea, because getting back to what Fidel said before, in my opinion, one thing is that one material is reusable, but from my side it's more challenging, more fascinating, the recycling process, when you give a new life to a material at a different life. From my side it's easier, for example, what Daniela mentioned before, if you are working in the photovoltaic field and you take silicon, and the silicon afterwards, a solar cell, whatever, you recycle the silicon, and again the silicon goes back to make another silicon solar cell. This is easy. More or less, we are not moving further. But it's more challenging, more fascinating when you take this silicon and you use it in another field of research. And maybe if we take a more global view, we can combine and make synergies between different areas, different research areas. And maybe what you don't use it, I can use it in a different way. And in that case, if we make recycling more global from many different approaches, many different points of view, maybe it's more effective. Because otherwise, okay, we use silicon, for example, or lithium for the batteries, and the lithium, I can take again the lithium, going back to the battery, going again, and well, this is the same wheel once and again. But it's better if we can structure it and make it something new, something different. And there, it's where the novelty, the new approaches, the advance, the challenging, it's, well, from my side, it's more interesting.
Related to this concept of recycling, Alicia Valero, which is a researcher from the Universidad de Zaragoza, has introduced the concept of this Thanatia. Thanatia is, always when you recycle, when you have some material and you make a product and then you dismantle and recycle, of course you are losing entropy. At the end of the day, entropy is there. So you are losing a lot of material. There is something that you can never recover. And this part of this energy or exergy or whatever you can name it, that you cannot use any longer, then it goes to somehow to a different space, which is this Thanatia, from Thanatos. The idea is then, and it's quite related to what David is saying, the idea could be, there are two ways. One way is to improve all our mechanisms, improve all our recycling processes, so that this material that goes to Thanatia, that's the first idea. So if I lose less material or I use less productivity, it's better. And the other thing is, somehow it's also related to a cultural aspect nowadays, even in the technological field. We always are looking for the optimal situation, but sometimes it's not necessary. For instance, you can recover a lot of material from many processes, from LCDs, from batteries, from a lot of materials, a lot of waste materials, and you can recover very valuable materials, oxides that can be used for many different things, for instance. Of course, they are not going to have the best quality, but now the question is, do we really need the best quality for everything? So sometimes we are eclipsed or somehow flashed by the necessity of having the best, but not always is necessary to have the best. If I'm going to drive in the field, in the country, and all that I have are just ways without the pavement, I don't need a box. Of course, I need a car, but the requirement is not that this car is the best. So somehow we should also change our minds to look not for the absolute optimum, but for something which is good enough for the purpose I'm going to use it. Of course, it could be done much better, but it's okay in this way. And doing it that way, it's perfect, it's working, and I'm not wasting so many time and so many material. And that's quite related to also what you were saying. I mean, of course, you are losing in each recycling. You are losing. Your material is always worse quality. Probably it does not matter. For some purposes, of course. But then we could just keep in mind, okay, that for this special application, I need the best. First, the best in what? Probably I need the best in conductivity. but perhaps not the best in mechanical resistance, for instance. So we must, and again, can be curious because then look for materials that can be more easily recycled and can be reused. And so you can introduce again the materials in the technological life cycle, even if it's not in the same wheel of this cycle, but in the different one. But it's really a quite value. And I'm sure you can think of many examples in which you have used in your life in which you could apply this principle, not going for this optimal solution, but just for a good solution. No? Yeah.
So one view is to think about the recycling, also another of reusing, but maybe not thinking about very sophisticated materials, but in common life, it's always nice to remember about reducing. So some things are actually not necessarily needed. Maybe we can skip the consumption of some plastic-related material or bottle or whatever in the faculty, in our context. But this is again going to the ethics of our behavior and how we challenge ourselves with the things that we could change even with oneself. Right? So this, I bring it because in the context of the faculty, in the group of sustainability, we are trying to develop a poll for students and for the personal, all types of workers in the faculty, and derive this type of questions of how we perceive pollutants and how we perceive materials that maybe we should reduce or reuse or recycle. And I don't know, I wouldn't like to deviate from your main direction of questioning. But I find it interesting, what does the academic world think about also what can be done in our context? Like things that would be unthinkable 20 years ago regarding the environment in the faculty. People would smoke in the classroom, then in the corridors, then in the bar, then nowhere else. And many things have changed in our approach to the everyday culture. Some of them related to materials, some of them could be perhaps something to come in the future. Some of them, I will be brief, don't make the story long. We have a problem because they disappear once they go out of the faculty. If you have your plastic thingy, it goes to the container in the front, and then I don't know where it goes. If you see a documentary of Asia, there is amazing documentaries of real mountains of materials, also electronic. I would be interested in that. To what level can this be recycled or reduced, or not reduced, reused in the future or whatever? You know, the sixth continent in the north of the Pacific, because of this gyre circulation in the ocean, the Kuroshio current, and all the follow-up of this current to the American, the anticyclonic circulation there, is really full of plastic. And you don't see it because it goes through the door, but then you don't feel empathy with whatever happens to that because it's not in your life. And if we talk about CO2 emissions, I mean, that you even see it less. So what can be the actions that can really bring a new perception, either in the direction that you say, or for materials, or regarding emissions because of the energy that you invest to produce them? I don't know if the question is valid, but I'm interested from the academic point of view. We may spend hours in discussing this, and then you find yourself in one of these groups in the faculty and say, what can we do that really makes a difference?
Yeah, for instance, thinking on how we do. Somehow we are contradictory in the sense that, for instance, a couple of years ago, it was, and not now because of the pandemic, but before the pandemic it was also so. It was possible to have a jar with water, and now it's not. Not to have a jar with water, and now it's not. And it's not, at this moment, it's for the pandemic, that's clear. But before the pandemic, January last year, it also wasn't possible. It was possible to have the water, you went to the tap in the water, in the self-service, but not in the dining room. In the dining room you have the bottles. Sometimes you have yeah. Or for instance with the oil.
With the oil, it's quite crazy.
With the oil, it's quite crazy. And with the oil, it's a problem. It was possible to have the oil in a small bottle. And now it's not possible. Or it's not possible because, as far as I know, there was some problem with fraud. And so the people who lives from oil was complaining that people were doing fraud. And then to avoid it,
the plastic dose.
then the plastic dose. But the plastic doses are incredible amounts of plastic, or coffee with the capsules. All these things are, and as you are telling them, you lose completely the track of these things. You cannot track. You cannot see where all this waste is going. So you think, okay, it's going to be recycled.
Yeah, and I was
also the electronic waste.
Also electronics.
It's really a big problem. I've read it has been done a study that even now those critical raw materials, which are very critical and very rare, are more, there are a larger amount of, for example, gold, palladium, and so on in the waste, in the electronic waste, only in the United States than in mines. So I think then it will become also cost effective to recycle because we are reducing a lot the amount of those kind of material for mines. So I think that our future mines will be waste, the electronic waste. I don't think that we have another way.
Yeah, the problem with this, and then we can make a bridge to the last question I wanted to pose here, is, well, when we talk about sustainability and materials, there are two different important concepts. One, you have just mentioned, it is the critical raw materials, so the lack of many of the materials we are using in current technology are quite rare. Lithium is not, there is no lithium enough to all the electric cars we want to drive.
The point that we know it.
Yeah?
The point is that we know it, but instead of facing the problem, we said, okay, maybe in Mars we find lithium, or in the moon. But sometimes it's better to face the problem. It's okay. For example, for lithium, there are 2 or 3 different scenarios depending on the demanding of the lithium-ion batteries. Maybe in 10 years, 20 years, or 30 years, they're running out of lithium, and this is something that we know. So instead of going on with the use of lithium in this kind of batteries, we should face the problem and change the strategy. Instead of thinking, okay, maybe in the moon, maybe in Mars, maybe something appears suddenly. So it's something that we have to
no, but
face.
it's curious because you are thinking on lithium, and most of us are thinking on lithium as fundamental for batteries. But there are many applications, and if the lithium disappears, it disappears. Not only for batteries. So the problem is not only to develop an alternative for lithium batteries, it's to develop an alternative for lithium. And probably the alternative is to change our mind for batteries and try to keep the lithium for what is not replaceable. It's something like I told before. Probably it's not the best solution, but it's good enough. Is this idea? And also with the rare materials, the problem is that looking for the best efficiency, the best materials, the most resistant, the most everything, we are using more and more and more materials for the same product. Some years ago, the number of materials, of different materials, that were forming part or were taking part in the construction of a car, for instance, was much lower than now. Now we have enormous variety of different plastics, different polymers, and in fact it could be used only one. But it's cozier if you use two different ones, because then you have the contrast in color, you have, this is softer. So for the seed, it's better. And so then we are multiplying the number of materials, the need for materials we're using. Some years ago there was something which is platinum, now it's also quite rare. Platinum is being used in most catalyzers in car. And there was in this case it was a company made a study, and there were tons of platinum in all the, I don't know how to say in English, cuneta. How is cuneta in English? Cuneta is just the
side of the road.
In the road,
in
the side of the road.
A side of the road.
So,
because of the...
yeah, because small nanoparticles of platinum were being expelled in the gases of the escape of the motor, the things, and all the grass around along the roads, and all these small walls that separate the two senses of the road, the two lines of the road, were completely covered by small nanoparticles of platinum and many other things, but among all the things was platinum. What is the problem then? There is no profit. You cannot recover this platinum because you must you have to cut kilometers and kilometers and kilometers of grass, recover all this grass, treat all this grass, and after that you have some grams or some kilograms of platinum. But you have spent a lot of time and you have wasted a lot of money. So that's perhaps one of the main problems in which we are not conscious of these small things that are happening when you, you say, well, platinum, the catalyzers don't suffer. It's normally, by definition, the catalyzer is not a step. It's the definition. It catalyzes the reactions, but do not intervene. So, since it doesn't intervene, it's always there. But that's not true. Because small particles, because of friction, because of extra heating, or main processes, can be expelled, and then you cannot recover. So it's also the progress in many things we are not conscious. So I think that could be really very important to keep this information to the front and to say all the process, not only for instance in the advertisement to say this is quite green, this is recycled. How it is recycled? What does it mean that it's recycled? And well, so I wanted to so the difference between these materials or these elements that are quite rare, in which the problem is that it's true that they are not used in a high quantity. Catalyzer lasts forever, but you might change the catalyzer of the car. 100,000 kilometers or something like that. It's really, they are not driving. But they are used, they last quite a lot. They are used in very few quantities. That's example coltan, the famous coltan. Coltan, it's in all the devices, in all the phones, and it's really viejita, no sé cómo se dice viejita en inglés. Una viejita. But there are a lot of viejitas. So that means, and it makes no profit to recover it, because no company is going to mount a factory to recover these small amounts of content. not profitable.
No, I think
It's lost.
yeah.
Well, you can make it profitable. You can give an extra value to this, all these processes, all these materials, and you need money, of course. But there is no other exit.